So, what really stands between Europe and cheap green power? Not climate targets, not technology, not even money, actually. Energy dependence. It's just in a green mask, but it's energy dependence. So, this episode is about one simple question. Why are countries in the periphery of Europe, like Spain, Portugal, Denmark, Finland, Greece, why are those countries quietly leading European growth while Central Europe is stalling? Everyone says Europe won the energy war, right? We decoupled from the blood Russian gas. Well, here's the problem. We may have replaced it with a new dependency expensive, volatile American LNG. Different supplier, same vulnerability. But there's more. Many will say we'll just build nuclear like France. Well, actually, nuclear countries didn't win this shock. And why? Because they didn't build for a long time. While peripheral countries built learning curves in renewables for 20 plus years, the nuclear countries didn't build. So, in this episode, is what I'll show you. One, why cheap green power is now industrial policy. Two, why energy volatility, not emissions, is killing competitiveness. Three, why renewables changed growth geography in Europe. And how the AWTY data explains all of this phenomenon, who adapts and who pays. So this isn't energy for energy's sake. Let's make it clear. If you write EU proposals, if you design projects, if you advise institutions, or if you do economic research, this episode shows you how to avoid backing the wrong model. And if this way of thinking feels different, good, because it's the core idea behind my new book, Transition Science in the Economy, published last month, November 15th. It's a book that tries to connect the dots between green transition, digital transition, geopolitics, housing, and economic growth, using real data, not slogans, no gurus, just data. So stay with me because the real question here isn't whether we are transitioning, it's actually where we are transitioning to. This episode of InnovEU, the EU Project Chronicles, is brought to you by my new book, Transition Science in the Economy. In it, I use data from more than 180 countries and 150,000 observations, data points, to show how five global shifts, five global transitions, the digital, the green, the new globalization, the transition to a war economy, and the housing crisis transition, how these five transitions are collapsing the middle class and rewriting prosperity and power. So if you want a clear map of today's economy and economic chaos, search for Transition Science in the Economy on Amazon and get your copy. So, how fast did Europe go from Russian gas dependency to American LNG dependency? Well, after 2022, Europe moved really fast, almost heroically fast. Strange how Europe managed to move so fast. It's not usual. Russian pipeline gas collapsed from over 40% of EU imports to single digits. So, what filled the gap? American LNG. By 2024, the US became Europe's largest gas supplier. LNG replaced pipelines as the marginal energy source. So gas pricing became fully global and financialized. Here's the problem. LNG is not just gas in liquid form. It's a different political economy. LNG creates three structural vulnerabilities. One, price volatility. LNG is traded on global spot markets. So Europe is now competing with Asia for cargoes. Prices spike during the cold winters, during wars, or during shipping disruptions. Uh, Vulnerability number two, geopolitical exposure. The US is a friendly ally to Europe, or is it? Well, that's an issue for another episode, but nevertheless, energy dependence always becomes leverage. Industrial planning cannot rely on another country's export policy. Vulnerability number three, there's a permanent cost premium. Well, let's face it, you have to extract the gas, make it liquid, ship it, then make it gas again. There's a higher base cost. So even cheap LNG is structurally more expensive than pipeline gas or renewables. So Europe did not escape dependency. It escaped from one form of dependency and entered another, just cleaner, more polite, and more expensive, more civilized also. So from bloody energy to financialized energy. Now, why does this hurt Central Europe more than the periphery? Because their entire growth model in Central Europe was built on continuous base load power, gas-dependent industry, stable long-term contracts, and Germany is the clearest case. Germany did not just lose gas, it lost price predictability. And well, industrial economies don't die from shortages, they die from uncertainty. Meanwhile, the peripheral countries were not exposed in the same way. And why was that? Because they were not betting on imported molecules like Central Europe, they were betting on wind and sun. And now many people say, well, if nuclear is cheap and clean, why aren't nuclear countries also winning? Good question. And the short answer is, well, nuclear exists, but it has not expanded. For decades, most European nuclear capacity was built between the 70s and the 90s. So it's now aging, which means higher costs with maintenance, safety, regulatory costs. And it has seen very little net new capacity added. France is the perfect example for this. It has nuclear, but well, new plants are massively delayed. Flamanville is an example. And when that happens, when time drags on, costs explode. And that's also what happened. So nuclear could not replace blood energy from Russia. And it will take forever to do so. So there's a learning curve issue here also. Renewables benefited from, well, learning by doing, rapid cost declines, modular scaling, continuous deployment for 20 plus years. So as a result of all that, solar and wind costs fell like 80, 90% since the early 2000s. 90% less, it's way down. So peripheral countries, they built renewables every single year. They developed grid know-how. They built storage, flexibility, and forecasting capacity. So they learn how to manage intermittency. This is so difficult to pronounce that sometimes it fails, like in the blackout in the Iberia this spring. Well, but most of the time they manage intermittency, and this matters because they didn't just install capacity, they built institutional competence. Nuclear does not have this dynamic. Nuclear has had bad press for 5 decades or more. So, and on the other hand, each plant is tailor made, unique. It has long lead times, 10, 15 years, and political risk at every step. So there's no fast learning curve. So nuclear countries, once the capacity is built, they're stable, they're great, but they have trouble adapting. And in transition economies, well, in transition economics, green and war economy, for instance, these two transitions, for them, adaptability beats stability every day. So Why did the renewables translated into growth in the peripheral countries? Well, they now have lower marginal electricity costs. They had faster price stabilization after 2022. They are less exposed to gas and LNG volatility. And well, for some reason, they have better AWTY green transition scores. While Central Europe has higher industrial prices, it has slower adjustments, legacy lock-ins, they have exposure to global gas markets. So, not see this isn't ideology. This it's path dependence versus path creation. So what does AWTY tell us? Resilience beats capacity. The index doesn't reward the installed capacity or moral ambition or historical assets. It rewards shock absorption, price stability, energy sovereignty, speed of adjustment. That's why, in the end of the day, Denmark, Finland, Greece, Spain, Portugal score high, while Germany and France underperform relatively to expectations. AWTY, the index captures who can function when the system breaks. Let's make this real. So uh, I want to walk you through. I forgot to change these slides for the video. Sorry about that. We are in this slide. Okay. I want to walk you through two pairs of countries. Same continent, same rules. They're all in the European Union. Same shock, the invasion of Ukraine, and very, very different outcomes. So first comparison, first case study, Spain versus Germany. You are comparing learning curves with lock-in. So Germany, the industrial giant, they lost price control. They did many things right. They have world-class industry, engineering excellence, early climate ambition also. But Germany made one critical bet, Russian gas. And cheap Russian gas became the backbone of the industry, their main competitive advantage, the anchor of electricity pricing, the stabilizer of competitiveness. When that gas disappeared, Germany faced the highest industrial electricity prices in Europe. Emergency subsidies measured in hundreds of billions, firms relocating or pausing investment, deindustrialization fears, they've become mainstream. This wasn't an energy crisis, it was a business model crisis, actually. While Spain is a contrast. For years, Spain was dismissed as a peripheral, it is, less industrial, it is, overinvested in renewables. They had this label, too much sun, not enough seriousness. But Spain did three quiet things. They built massive renewable capacity early on. They invested in green flexibility and interconnections, and they reduced gas exposure before it was fashionable. So when the shock hit, electricity prices stabilized faster there. The Iberian price cap limited contagion, so it helped also. Spain became actually a net electricity exporter. Data centers, hydrogen projects, industry followed. So Germany had the capacity, but Spain had the adaptability. So the lesson here is Germany optimized for efficiency and stability, while Spain optimized for resilience and volatility. And well, stability is not very common nowadays. Only the second of those strategies seems to be working out. So let's look at the other case study. Let's compare Denmark and France. Comparison a little bit subtle. France is often held up as the nuclear success story. So historically, that's true. But here's what changed. Their nuclear plants aged, the new builds were delayed, maintenance became more and more complex, and output became unpredictable. In 2023, in 2022, also they had nuclear outages, forcing France to import electricity. prices spiked. So the supposed stable backbone, sorry, the stable backbone, which was supposed to be the nuclear plants, became fragile. And most of all, there was no learning curve. There was no scaling, no cost compression. Now let's look at Denmark. They made a very different bet, not on one technology, but on system intelligence. Over 25 years, Denmark has built offshore wind incrementally. They've invested in forecasting and grid control, in integrated storage, interconnectors, demand response. They turned intermittency into a managed feature, not a bug. So when energy prices exploded, well, Denmark's system absorbed the shock. Costs remained comparatively stable, and energy exports actually increased. So industrial planning remained credible. So France had the power plants, Denmark had the power system. So the lesson here for me, nuclear preserved yesterday's stability, but renewables created today's optionality, choices. And in a transition economy, having choices is very valuable. So what the AWTY index explains here is that the GDP and traditional metrics miss all of this because GDP will tell you the output, the scale, the size, while AWTY will tell you the stress tolerance, the adjustment speed, the vulnerability to shocks. And that's why AWTY explains why periphery leads growth in Europe, why the center hesitates, and why energy is now the core economic variable. So we come to the real question. If you're writing a research proposal, if you're designing a new project or advising institutions, or if you're doing some sort of research, how do you apply this logic? How do you avoid backing the wrong model? How do you frame your work in a way evaluators will reward? And actually, how will you turn transition risk into an advantage? Well, let's look at the next point, exactly that. And the idea is quite simple. So I have this short task for you, rewriting some energy narrative. If you're working on, as I said, an EU proposal, a project report, or a policy note, or a research paper, please open your current document, your proposal. Find every sentence that somehow says something like we support green transition, or this project contributes to decarbonization, or we align with climate objectives. That's common to have in these documents. Step number 2, rewrite those paragraphs and use a structure more similar to this project reduces exposure to energy price volatility by increasing the share of predictable domestic electricity. So, and this improves cost stability, protects competitiveness. From there, you can have a different set of arguments. And basically, that's it. You don't change the project. You change how power understands it, how you frame it. So this framing signals strategic maturity. It hopefully will align with evaluator priorities. It will surely do, and it will separate you from most of the other submissions. And you make this in 30 minutes. So why this makes people come back? When someone applies this, it improves your proposal, it avoids a bad assumption, and it associates success with these transitions. So that's how you build trust. So let's close here. The green transition is not about being virtuous. It's about who controls the costs, who absorbs the costs, who stays competitive when the system breaks, because the systems are always breaking in these days. Some European countries understood that early. Others are still paying for blood energy, just under a different flag. So if you want to go deeper into this logic, I write about it every week in my newsletter, my Substack, Polidoxa, the transitions letter. And that's where I break down these transitions with more detail and data, and explain who wins, who loses, and most importantly, how you can avoid strategic mistakes and make better decisions. And if you want the full framework behind today's episode, it's in my new book, Transition Science in the Economy. It's available on Amazon. It's where I show the main transitions: the green, the digital, the war economy, the new globalization, the housing crisis. And I show how these main transitions interact to shape growth, risk, and power. So links in the description. Because actually, in this decade, the question is not, are we transitioning? It's, are we transitioning in the right direction, or are we paying the price for getting it wrong? Now, see you next. Oh, one final point, Christmas break. So we'll be back with a new season in January. Bye.
Credits, author and host Fernando C. Gaspar, music Hugo Gaspar, Lisbon, Portugal, 2024. Reach us by email or DM.